I know you've been touring after a long time of not touring with a book. So the first thing I would like to ask to start the conversation is, how is it going? How is it like to be with the readers again and to meet? I mean, people had expectations. You had expectations. How's your book, Amigo Imaginario, treating you so far?
So far, it's been fantastic. The crowds have been wonderful, very receptive. I think people, I didn't know that so many people would be so excited that I have another book after all these years. You know, it's very gratifying, not only in terms of the number of people that have shown up to all the events, but the passion with which they've just shared their experiences in terms of what the Perks of Being a Wallflower has meant to them. And yeah, it's been a wonderful tour so far. You know, we had basically have hundreds of people everywhere I go, and it's very gratifying. You know, and some people are very surprised that I wrote something scary.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Francisca from Chile.
Oh, hello.
Oh, hello. Thank you for joining us. So I had this question because The Perks of Being a Wallflower, your first novel, it's a really beloved novel for many of us. And it took 20 years for you to deliver us another novel, and it's so different novel. Mm-hmm. So as a writer myself, I was wondering, how do you handle the pressure, you know, of knowing that everyone's eyes are on your book right now, ready to love it or hate it, ready to thank you or blame you for all of these years of waiting? I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. So how do you feel about it?
Well, I feel very, very excited. I would say equal parts excited and afraid, because you know, because it is a slight departure, certainly in terms of the genre. But I also feel that it's a fiercely personal book to me, and I know that maybe because of some of the subjects, it doesn't feel like that. But I'm writing a lot about my childhood growing up in Western Pennsylvania. I'm writing about some of the questions that I had growing up and being raised Catholic in Western Pennsylvania. And so yeah, in a lot of ways, it's as personal to me as The Perks of Being a Wallflower was. So yeah, so I'm excited. I'm excited to show this side of myself. And at the same time, I'm afraid, because I know that whenever you deal with spiritual matters, even if it's done in a thriller, even if it's done in a supernatural kind of way, you know, some people are going to bristle. And so I'm ready for that.
You are? Oh, that's so good.
Yes.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Adele from Mexico. I was wondering if you consider that something important in your writing is to talk about the tragedies in everyday life. Like in The Perks, you also talk about like a coming of age story, the difficulties of being a teenager. You talk about abuse. I think there's something about that also in this novel. How did you take this decision of enrich all these tragedies in everyday life with fantasy and horror and some Bible references?
Well, how I did it was I looked at how everyday fears or everyday tragedies or traumas and the fear that they cause and how they can relate to supernatural fears. What was interesting to me is looking at all the different things that scare us, whether it's you know, something as universal as a grim fairy tale, and there are allusions to Grimm, something as fairly universal as some of the religious you know, and spiritual issues that we're raised with as children. And you know, when I was a kid, I was just as afraid of Grimm's fairy tales as I was of the idea of damnation. And so I looked at those subjects, and I compared them with a lot of the things that people face that cause fear, whether some abuse happened, and so that could lead someone to be afraid of being touched or being hit again, or and I'm very interested, and this goes from The Perks of Being a Wallflower, all of my movies, and now with Imaginary Friend, I'm very interested in the fears that people keep inside them, that they carry with them as they go through life. And I want my work to be part of the healing of those fears, and so people can be less afraid.
That's so beautiful.
I wanted to know how did you felt when you decided you wanted to write this new book? Like, were you afraid? Did you had the idea before? You were roaming it for a long time? How was like the writing of that first line?
The writing of the first line was a great deal of fun. Well, I'll tell you in two parts. The genesis of the book was, I just had the idea that the experience that we all had as children, where you lay in the grass, you look up in the sky and you'd see the clouds. We all have that experience. And you'd say, oh, that looks like a dog, a hammer, a face, whatever it was. And so my original idea was, what would happen if a little boy looked up in the sky and realized that for the last 2 weeks, it was always the same face looking back at him. And when I thought of that, I thought it was an interesting, but I didn't know what it meant. And I just thought of that moment outside of his school when he's waiting for the last of the school buses go away and he's waiting for his mom to pick him up. And he's standing there and he's reading his book. And then the shadow cuts across the page and he looks up and the sky that was like maybe this big is now almost as big. The face is almost as big as the sky. And I thought of that moment when Christopher looks up at the cloud and says, hello, can you hear me? And there's the thunderclap that could be a coincidence. So he says, if you can hear me, blink your left eye. And I thought of the cloud going like this and then floating away. And I became obsessed with this idea. I didn't know what the cloud meant. I didn't know who the friend was. I thought of the title at around the same time. I didn't know who the friend was. I didn't know that it would lead me on something of a spiritual, supernatural journey. But I just followed the cloud. Which I think a lot of us do in our lives in metaphoric ways. So writing the first line when he says, don't leave the street, they can't get you if you don't leave the street. The line came very quickly. And the idea of this street that was our salvation came quickly. And so many of those images, the idea, I'm writing about the same neighborhood that I had in the Perks of Being a Wallflower. And if in Perks of Being a Wallflower, I wrote about the daytime, and Imaginary Friend, I wrote about night, where the dark streets and the woods and the deer. And it was all those things that I was raised with, and so, yeah, that was where it came from. And I remember, and I also love the idea, just as a parent, now I have 2 children and I think about things differently. I think more as a parent, and of all the characters, I relate to Kate Reese the most, the mom. And I remember, however, though, my memory of being a little boy, and all children want to protect their parents, and most children are too small to do it. And I thought how wonderful it would be to give a child a power so he could protect his mother.
And about that, the relationship between Christopher and his mother is so beautiful and so powerful. It really hit me. Did you inspire in your own life or someone else's?
It was inspired. I dedicated the book. I said it was for Liz and mothers everywhere. Liz is my wife. She's the mother of our 2 children. And so she was my inspiration for Kate Reese. My wife had a very difficult upbringing, and she's the strongest person that I know personally. And I basically, I saw her how having children changed her in so many ways, in very, very profound ways. And it's something that, even though I love my children and I'm a very devoted father, I noticed that the change in her was so much more profound than the change in me. It has to be biological, I would imagine, because I'm a pretty sensitive person and I love my kids. But just watching her change, watching her do anything for them, the need to protect it's very awe-inspiring to witness. So yeah, that's where it came from. And of course, I related to some of it, and I wrote about some of my own experiences of being a father through Kate Reese's devotion to Christopher. But it was really for Liz, and Christopher came from me.
This book is about relationships, Christopher and her mother, but also his friends. I think they are a great team. They support in Christopher in all his adventures. I want to know if you inspired at the same time in another story for having Christopher, or to have Christopher, this group of friends.
Well, yeah, the group of friends came from just memories, again, of growing up. especially the character of Special Ed. That's what I call him in, I'm not sure what he is in Spanish. I remember there's a boy up the road I grew up with named Eric Olson. He was a very, very good friend of mine when I was 3, 4, 5 years old. And I remember Eric used to be late to the bus sometimes, and he would bring bacon on the bus to eat on the school bus. And I always thought that was so funny. So I from that image, I thought of the character name of Special Ed, which is a pun here in English. It means special education. That's what we call it. So it's Special Ed.
Oh.
And so that's where the name came from. And then I just started thinking about him and what his parents must be like. And I don't know, I really enjoyed that. And then the M&Ms, I liked the fact that they were twins. I thought that was really interesting. And I love the idea of like a gang of boys, like these 4 boys. I was very taken by that because I had a group growing up that I loved, and they all moved away over the years. It's ironic, actually. I can share this with you. We can all think back to our childhood friends, and maybe you have a best friend in grade school. The first 12 best friends I ever had in my life, they all moved away. And so I lost my first 12 best friends over time, and they kept moving away. And so in a lot of ways, Imaginary Friend was my attempt to rekindle some of those friendships that I lost along the way of childhood.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, how would you describe your new book in 3 words? And the second question is, was it hard to make the readers, do you think it's going to be hard for them to make them scared, like when they are reading the book?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would describe it with 3 words. Here are my 3 words.
Okay.
Heart and horror. That's what this book is. In terms of the fear, so far it hasn't been difficult. People have been very afraid of the book in, I think, a very good way. Some people respond, and there are 2 types of horror in the book. Some of it is very subtle, and it's based more in the real world, and some of it's based in the imaginary world. And what's been interesting is to watch the different reactions. Some people find the real far more terrifying, and some people find the imaginary more fearful. So it's very interesting. It's like almost like a Rorschach test. I will say this, probably I've heard more than anything else, the part in the book where Christopher's where the children's program, Bad Cat, when the Saturday morning cartoon program stops its episode, turns to the camera and says, "Oh, hi, Christopher. Are you enjoying the show?" Pretty much across the board, everyone is afraid of that scene. The television talking back to Christopher.
I don't know if you read what people have reviews that are out there, but in The Guardian, Alison Flood said that Imaginary Friend was like an homage to Stephen King. And I would like to know if that's true, if you had him as your influence, as an influence while you were writing. And you were talking about the Grimm brothers before. I don't know if they were also kind of a reference and influence, and which other terror authors would you consider influences in this novel?
Well, Stephen King, he's my favorite writer of all time. And really ever since I was about 12 years old. So yes. It is a complete homage to him, and almost like it's almost like a fan letter to him. He's even in the acknowledgments of my book. I said in my book where I thanked Emma Watson for inspiring the ending on the set of The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I for inspiring everything else. So yes, absolutely, I think he's a genius, and I can't say enough good. I wish he would win the Nobel Prize for Literature. I don't know if he will, but I wish he would. There are many, Grimm, of course, the fairy tales, they scared me. And also a lot of, I am a filmmaker, and a lot of movies, whether it's John Carpenter's Halloween, or it's The Exorcist, or The Omen, or Hitchcock's Psycho, or The Sixth Sense, M. Night Shyamalan's movie, I thought was fantastic, and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, which I also pay tribute to in my book. I keep referencing 217 in the book, And that is both a tribute to The Shining book, where they stay in room 217, and it's also a reference to the Shining movie, where they stay in room 237. So that's a little wink to the horror crowd. I also love Peter Straub. I think Joe Hill is fantastic. I loved his book, The Fireman. And trying to think of any other classics that I'm missing. That's pretty much it. That's that group.
Will you say that when you're writing horror, you write about things that scare you or about things that will scare others?
I think a little bit of both. I think that, human beings have a lot of common fears. And whether it's a fear of something that can come and get them or kill them or hurt them, or it's a fear that we all have where that voice in our head says, maybe you're not good enough, or you're not smart enough, or you don't look nice enough, or you weigh too much, or this, that, or the other. We all fight that voice. And one of the interesting things I was able to explore in Imaginary Friend is the idea of whether or not that voice is real or it's somebody else. Like, is that you saying all those terrible things to you, or is it something else?
Well, there's like a quote in the back of the Spanish books that said, we can either swallow our fear or let it devour us. I wanted to ask you, was there a time while you were writing this book when you were afraid you wouldn't be able to pull it off, or that the public wouldn't like it as much as the perks?
The fear of not pulling, because especially if you've gotten to the end, I'm dealing with a lot of things, and I'm dealing with things that I also know are very important to people, and I'm trying to be very respectful of everybody's viewpoints about the subject. So it was very interesting and somewhat scary. I was worried about not pulling it off. I knew it was a long book, but I wanted it to be a readable book. I knew that it was dealing with big subjects, but I wanted them to be relatable. And I knew that I was dealing with issues that could be very polarizing, but I wanted to be respectful of both sides. So yeah, pulling it off was my fear. In terms of whether or not, in terms of people liking it as much as The Perks of Being a Wallflower or more, I know some people will like it more because they're more inclined to read horror than they are coming of age. And some people will like The Perks of Being a Wallflower more because it meant so much to them when they were younger, or they like coming of age better than horror. At the end of the day, if I am now 49 years old, and the idea that 20 years after I wrote a book, that people still care about it and still buy it and still talk about it and still cherish it is such an honor that, if 30 years from now, I hope I have a very long life. If at the end of my life, the only thing that is worth putting in my obituary is The Perks of Being a Wallflower, I'll be fine with that.
What about Wonder? Get out of here.
Yeah, well, thank you. I love Wonder, and I love Beauty the Beast, and I love doing Rent, and I love doing Jericho, and I love Imaginary Friend. So yeah, I'm very proud of what I've been able to do. It's more of listen, I know this is a departure, and so far people have been very excited about it. I think it's made a couple of Catholics mad. I'm one of them, so I know what I was trying to say, but and some of them get it and some of them don't. Anyway, but I know that I knew I was taking a chance with this, but I'm really excited that I took it. And it's really been very gratifying when people come up to you and they say that it's one of the best horror books they've ever read, or they've read in 10 years. And maybe the next person in line is saying, like, what did you mean by this? And I say, so I said, well, and both can be true, and it's fine with me if it I'm a nice person, so I don't like people to be offended or anything like that. But so far I think the response has been mostly very, very positive.
Did you enjoy writing horror? It was a good genre for you?
I loved it because all those scenes, I'm because of all my training in the movies, my brain thinks very cinematically. So even when I'm writing prose, I'm feeling very, even when I'm writing prose, I see it as pictures. I always have. And so it was very freeing to write something that could exist so much in sound and in imagery, and in some cases repetition. I want to say one thing about the prose style, and I don't know if this is useful for your purposes, but I want to share it. The book is written, I'm not sure about the translation that was done. But I wrote the book almost from a child's point of view.
Yeah.
In the sense that if you read it and you say, wow, the sheriff is known as the sheriff pretty much the entire book. And the teachers are known by their proper names, like Senora Henderson, or even saying Christopher's mother. I say that a great deal. And the reason is because that is how children see the world. And what I love to do is establish that tone or establish that point of view and be consistent with it. That's also why, if you notice, there's so much repetition of language. The reason why there's so much repetition of language is that is how children are taught fairy tales, number one. That is how all religious training happens when you're young. And that repetition becomes indoctrination. The repetition itself becomes almost an incantation that we say almost automatically. I can be half asleep and recite the Lord's Prayer. And so I thought about that as a style for telling a book, but then also as a style for telling a horror book. I thought it was, I don't know, I thought it was, I made that choice, and so far people, I think, have caught on to it. It's really gratifying because it's not an obvious choice to make.
We're talking about fear, and I would like to know, which one do you think it's harder, writing horror or showing it on screen?
That's a great question.
Because for me, I think writing it's more difficult because you have to make things happen inside everyone's without showing everything, just with letters and lines.
Well, I am going to make the movie of this someday. So maybe I can answer that question a lot better in 5 years.
Okay.
I will say, you know what? I think I'll probably say that it's harder to write it in a book. And the reason is because you have to show internally and externally. In a movie, it's pretty much exclusively external. It's very difficult to show the things that scare people inside of themselves in such a literal medium as film or television. So yeah, I'd say probably books, because it has to work on both levels. It has to be frightening in terms of the scene, and then it has to also serve all the characters' fears inside of their hearts or their souls.
I'm sorry, I also talk too much.
Not at all.
I was wondering, you said beautiful things about your wife before, and there's something that I think happens in the perks and here, that is the way you write about women and the things that happen to them. I think it's really important to give voice to these difficulties that sometimes happen because of gender. So is that like a personal choice, or do you have it like in your genes, or how is that something important for you to translate in your work?
That's a very nice question. Thank you. Yes, it is very, very personal to me. I couldn't tell you exactly why that I relate so deeply to what I believe at least women experience. I have many friends that have had difficult times in their lives, and I care about them very much. I was raised in a household where my mom and dad were very much equal to each other. And I was taught, Pittsburgh, where I'm from in Western Pennsylvania, it's a really cool town in the sense that you're taught to respect everyone where they are. Meaning, if you're writing about children, you don't talk down to a child. You look at it, you get on your knee and you see the child eye level. If you're speaking to a woman, you speak with the same kind of respect of equality. Nobody is better than anybody else. You might have more money, you might have more power, you might be older, you might have, who knows, whatever it is, but that doesn't make you an inherently better person. And so I was raised to believe that, and I believe it with all of my heart and soul. I also feel that I love writing about women because I feel that, I don't know, I very, very much relate to, I guess, God, how do I say this in the right way?
Just say it.
That sounds good.
I relate to women in a very profound way. Some of the things that I've gone through in my life are so similar to what women I've known, dear friends and my wife and other people have gone through. And I just feel like I somehow get it. Maybe I don't get all of it. And maybe I see it in a lens because I am a man. I'm a straight man. And, so I'm sure there are some limitations that I'm not aware of, but there's just a feeling like when I'm writing about Mary Catherine McNeil, and I'm thinking about her as this young woman who believes what she has been taught so much, and she's such a good young woman, and that her thinking of, what if I sin and before I'm able to go to confession, I die, and I'm so afraid of being damned, and how people internalize that, how people can blame themselves for the things they've been through, or how people can take on an almost impossible expectation of a life. I really relate to that. And I may not have had all the same experience that Mary Catherine had, but I have a lot of them. So there's that. Or with Kate Reese, I see what my wife goes through, and because I'm something of an empath, I have a great deal of empathy for what she experiences, because I believe in her so deeply that when I write about her, I write with a sense of longing, because we all know what it's like to love someone, and I'm sure everyone on our line right now knows, if you could just, give them everything that you think they deserve, right? And so I can't do that. I don't have a magic wand. I don't have a magic pill that's going to take away certain doubts or certain pain or some painful experience in the past. I can't do that. But what I can do is write about a character and throw all the passion that I want for the women in my life to overcome, experience, or feel. And then, I also have a great deal of sympathy. As you notice in the book, there are quite a few elderly characters, men and women. And just like I don't exactly know what it's like to be 85 years old, I do know what it's like to have my grandmother be 91 and not remember who I am, and to write about that in a way, and almost with Christopher, to wish that I had the power to touch her and to have her remember everything about her life and to come back to us, So yeah, I probably didn't answer your question the right way, but those are all the things that I feel, and I do it all the time. I want freedom for all people, and I want all people to be able to live happy, good lives. And because I respect all people fundamentally the same, in this case, they happen to be women, and I'm glad that you feel like I've done a good job of it.
Can you explain a bit your writing process? Because I wish to be a horror author one day, so maybe you could inspire me a bit. Tell me about your writing process.
Well, over the years, I'm older now, but over the years, I have collected a document that I call napkin notes, okay? I used to write on napkins, and now I type it. And my process with Imaginary Friend, I thought of that original idea, but then I thought of something else. I was looking over, I went to my napkin notes. This document is like 12,000 pages long. And every idea, line, character, image, what I do is I write it down, and then I label it. So let's say this is an idea, and then I just say horror, crime, noir, line, funny, whatever. I categorize it. And then when I'm starting a work, what I'll do is I'll go through it and I'll look at everything that I said it had horror elements or childhood or memory or whatever it is. And then I have a massive notes document. In the case of Imaginary Friend, when I started, I think it was 179 pages long.
Wow.
So I already had 179 pages of just random ideas and images. And what I looked for was how they all related to each other. Because subconsciously, I've been working on this book for 3 decades. I didn't know it, but I was.
Oh.
And so I take those ideas and I string the ones together that belong, and they lead to other ideas, and they lead to other themes and characters. And it just becomes a really fun game of, I don't know, it's almost like a free association or like an improv. That's how I do it. So when I write, I just don't worry about it, and I just kind of let it go, and I let it be interesting and whatever. And then by the end of the book, once I'm done to the end, then I really revise and I make sure it all holds together. so I'll also say this to you as a young writer, is that just to not convince, there's a lie. The lie is writer's block. I do not believe that writer's block exists. What I believe about writer's block is when it happens, you're just trying to edit too fast, okay? You're trying to judge what you're writing before you actually wrote it. And it makes people afraid. They can't get it out. Just write it. Don't worry about it. Let tomorrow tell you if today's any good. You know, that's the best thing. And if you always have that system, then today is always free, you know? So do that.
Stephen, what was more difficult to write, the imaginary world or the real world?
Imaginary, much harder. The real world's very easy for me to write about. You know, all the characters and the things that they face in their lives and the feelings that they have about their lives. That was very, very easy. So if you found like an emotional part of the story, or like when Ambrose remembers his late wife, or when Kate Reese remembers her late husband, or some of the things that the characters are facing, some of the children, so easy. Once I went over to the other side, that was far more difficult, you know, because it's a literal other world that I'm trying to understand for myself, and I hope for the readers. So yeah. That's a great question. No one's that's
Thank
pretty,
you. I just want to say one thing.
Go.
Since I started to read the book, I have nightmares every night. Yeah.
Oh,
really.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this is for me like a must ask question. Did you have an imaginary friend growing up?
Well, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say no comment.
That is a yes. Like a yes.
Yeah,
That's the only question I'm not going to answer. That's the only one. I'll answer them all, not that one.
But did you have, I don't know, conversations with people that had imaginary friends growing up?
Yes.
At least? Yes.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
You know, and you know, let me ask you: is everybody on this? Did everybody read the whole book? Is everyone done?
Yes.
That's okay. Well, I don't want to give away the. I don't want to give away the twist.
I don't want spoilers.
Spoilers. I can't spoil it for everyone else. But you know, anyway, everybody else knows what I'm talking about. I thought, you know, here I have probably the greatest single line pitch for a book I will ever have, and I can't use it, and it drives me crazy.
Or how do you create a good villain or a good, like, I don't know, challenge maybe for a character when you're talking about terror? Like right now we have like so many authors that have written terror before. It's so cinematic, as you were saying. Like we have all these amazing filmmakers here in Mexico. There's Guillermo del Toro that like create monsters, and the new generations are harder to scare maybe. So how do you create a great villain that makes you want to stick throughout the book and throughout the adventure?
Well, I hope how I would approach it is how I approach every character. The idea that to approach a villain almost as if he or she views themselves, which is the hero of the story. You know, to me, the most frightening thing is when someone does horrible things in what they think is good for good reasons. You know, in history. That has led to some of the biggest horrors the world has ever known. People that felt completely justified in their horrific actions or their horrific speech. So yeah, that's how I do it, you know. And also looking again at the things that unite us all as people. You know, we all have fear for our children. We all have fear for our parents if we are children. We all have, you know, the idea that you can turn a Saturday morning cartoon into a menacing scene, or you can be out in the woods and you don't know what's out there. And you begin to, you know, you find things hidden out into the woods. I think these are all images that will stay with us and that we can all relate to on some level. So I think that's how you do it. In terms of the villain, again, if the villain feels justified in what he or she is doing and can even on some level coax the reader into believing that this is a really good idea for, you know, for a time being. Well, I don't know anything that's more frightening than that.
Well, I was reading the blurb Emma Watson wrote for you, which is amazing, by the way. She didn't only say this book was a masterpiece, but that it was like both a spiritual enlightenment book and a horror book. How can you accomplish both?
Well, I feel that is what I set out to accomplish. It was looking at, okay, so I'm trying to, as an author, I'm trying to look at the entire scope of all the things that frighten kids, okay? And whether it's, like I said, grim fairy tales, and we all know the woods, and, you know, here's Christopher, and he has a little red riding, he has a red hoodie as he goes, just like Little Red Riding Hood. So, you know, Hansel and Gretel, the witch becomes the hissing lady. So all of these things, these primal fears. So I'm doing that. And at the same time, I'm talking about some of the, I guess, some of the religious fears I was taught as some of the, someone has a dog, well done. Some of the things that I was raised to fear when I was young. So to me, I was looking at everything that might crawl into a child's imagination and take root. You know, even the idea of this, I mean, the idea of a little boy picking up a white plastic bag in the woods and begin to talk to it as if it's a friend. Even that whole idea of how often do we worry for our children that they might have some kind of a mental illness or something that we can't get at. You know, we all want to protect our kids, but what if you can't see the thing that's threatening them? What if you can't find it? You know, so yeah, all those, that's how I did it. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for you know, your interest, but also it means so much to me as someone, you know, I love. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to me that my book is going all through Spanish world like this. You know, it's such a beautiful language, and I'm very, very honored that my book is in it.